I think we're officially live, and I believe we are recording, which is awesome. Everything, yes. Okay. We're off to a good start. I will just briefly mention that I'm not technologically savvy at all. So probably shouldn't have put me in charge, but that's fine.
You'll be better than me.
We've got a few people filtering through, I believe, which is good.
A few minutes.
Yeah. I'm excited. I actually didn't think the number was going to change, but the number's changing. So it's what
It's all working.
it is. And I'm very used to just being in an appointment and just talking to the person that I'm talking with. I need to be very conscious that there's so many other people here tonight. But welcome to everyone who has joined in so far. You have myself and Leanne. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rhea. I'm the one that talks a lot, and sorry in advance. But hopefully tonight it's productive, informative, and helping wrapping up the year.
That's the plan.
It is. So I suppose, should we give it a little bit more? I know there's a few people here already, which is exciting.
Yeah, let's give it another minute. For the people that are here, as we're going through, you're welcome to use the Q&A box, which should be at the bottom if you're using a computer. So as you go through, just pop in any questions or any points you'd like us to discuss, and we will be able to get to that at the end. Hopefully we'll leave enough time for a bit of discussion. So.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose something that we haven't made totally obvious is that we're not just going to talk about Christmas, as much as I'm wearing a Christmas hat. We are going to talk about wrapping up the year. We know in the past that we have discussed navigating the festive season and how to do that best. But given the year that we've had this year, we thought it would be better to discuss all things wrapping up the year and sort of navigating the end of what's been a very up and down year.
Crazy year.
Very much so. All right, so should we get started?
Yeah, let's get into it. People can keep popping through.
Perfect. All right, so end of year fatigue, I suppose that sort of encompasses everything that we're going to be talking about tonight. And we're sort of under the assumption that you're here watching tonight, or the playback. You're here watching that because you're probably not really sure how you're going to navigate the next month or so, and you're potentially not feeling fabulous already given the status of the year so far. So we kind of wanted to talk about what is end of year fatigue and how to manage that, I suppose. And I think the biggest point that we wanted to make is that it is normal, what you're experiencing, and seeing that say increase in symptoms at the moment is quite appropriate and normal given what's been going on.
Yeah, definitely. I think everyone feels a little bit overwhelmed coming towards the end of the year and the busyness, and after the year it's been, it seems a lot more busy than usual, and there's been a lot of stress and uncertainty throughout the whole year. And now, coming into some big events and some big changes, it can be, quite a lot going on. So we'll talk about what some of those changes are, and then some little tips and tricks and some things to think about in terms of managing the end of the year and what's coming up.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's sort of navigating it in a way that there's probably a lot more layers to the end of the year, because we found especially here in Melbourne, we found our bubble that we stayed in, and we paced things accordingly, and we set up our life around it. And we are somewhat privileged to be going back to normal around the festive season, which is really exciting. But it does pose a bit of a difficulty in the sense that we feel like we're taking on quite a lot in a short span of time, potentially, and easing back into what our previous normal was will feel a little bit different to what our COVID normal was too.
Yeah, definitely. And then adding in Christmas and all the rest of it on top of that, gone from 0 to 100.
It really has. So tonight we're going to be discussing all things, management of triggers and setbacks and flare-ups. We're going to talk a little bit about stress and why that happens this time of year, which I think, that might be a little bit obvious, but we're going to talk a little bit more about that. We're going to discuss the change in routine. We're going to look at the increase in social load and how to manage that best. We're also going to talk a little bit about the hotter weather and managing the festive season. So as I said, it's not all things festive season, as much as I kind of like it that way. We'll ease into that. So I'm going to change slides and I'm going to take you to Leanne.
Oh, I can't change them, can I? That's up to you.
I don't know.
Awesome. So yeah, as Raya has said, it can be normal to feel a little bit, overwhelmed and increase in symptoms at this time of the year with all the changes coming and all the things that we'll highlight as we go through. And yeah, it's quite normal to have setbacks across recovery from a chronic condition, especially around this time of the year. There's a lot of ups and downs. So it's good just to have that awareness around setbacks, around our body, what's happening, so that we can be proactive in management. So we do have a few different types of setbacks to be aware of. I guess what we're mostly talking about today is that increase in our usual symptoms. So whether that be fatigue, pain, OI, whatever the usual symptoms are, that's mostly what tonight's referring to. But we can have different types of setbacks if it's something else going on, if we're unwell, if you're female, it's your time of the month, if you've had an injury, cold or flu, allergies. I think we've just passed allergy season, but maybe there's a bit of that hanging around as well. Yeah. So it's not always going to be pain, fatigue, OI. There can be other setbacks to be aware of. And that's where we want to have that awareness of what are your usual symptoms and what would be different. So in your usual symptoms, is that an increase in fatigue, increase in muscle aches, brain fog, dizziness, headaches, just general pain? And how are they coming on? So is that coming on gradually? Has there been a build over a period of time, or is it quite sudden? And all of this, gives us more information on how to manage that. So again, it's really normal to have setbacks in general, and especially this time of year. Like we'll keep saying, there's a lot of changes. It's really busy. It's been a big year. So setbacks are completely normal. And if we can just be aware of them, we can think about what we're going to do to help manage those setbacks and recover from them.
Definitely. And I think setbacks, just because they're inconvenient and they're annoying and they're not comfortable, we still need to be really kind to ourselves when we experience them. And I really love, Leanne, that you're saying that they are normal. I really think we need to talk about that because, yeah, they're not fun to deal with, but we need to be aware to gently support ourselves during that time too.
Yeah, 100%. And again, it's a busy time of year. And I think, like Raya said, we'll touch on Christmas as well. But whether you do celebrate Christmas or not, it is still a busy time of the year, and there are still a lot of changes happening. And I guess, yeah, just trying to be aware of what's changed and what triggers we can be aware of. So we typically break down, triggers into these 4 categories, and these are just some of the examples that we thought of. Some changes may be more subtle than others. But if we think about our physical load and our activity levels, there may be more to do. If we are out and about doing a lot more shopping, whether that's food shopping for more events and socializing, or Christmas shopping, there might be more cleaning, preparing the house to have visitors after no one entering for 8 months can be pretty clean. The warmer weather, which we will touch on in more detail. Our exercise might look different. There may be things in our routine that we rely on for exercise that pause over Christmas or change how they operate if we're relying on an external facility. And there may be changes in diet and hydration that come with the change in social events as well. If we're eating out a lot more or eating and drinking with friends and family, it's not our, regular routine again. So those changes in routine change a lot of other factors in what we're doing.
Mm.
Then we've got the cognitive. So I guess there can be a lot more to think about just in terms of what's on, what's happening, where do we have to be and when, who are we shopping for, organising all those events, and then the actual social activity itself. So again, we'll go into the increase in social load. So this typically is the time of year that people like to organise catch-ups. Maybe there's more end of year parties or events, Christmas events, and it's when a lot of people may be winding down with work and study as well. So we have a lot more time. So there generally is going to be an increase in social load. Mm-hmm. Yeah, emotional, I guess that can be anything depending on how you take this time of year. If it's really exciting, if we love Christmas, if it's stressful, there's always a high element of stress around the end of the year regardless. Is it frustrating? Are we getting annoyed at people? Are we looking forward to Christmas Day? So there's a lot emotionally that can change and are going on. And yeah, environmentally as well, things are just busier, and that's a big change again, coming out of a period of lockdown to a lot of busyness. And I always just think of shopping centres being super busy, super crowded, lots of people, really loud, like just awful. Sounds can be, maybe there's Christmas carols, maybe there's a lot of Christmas themes and decorations that you're not into. People tend to be a little bit more busy and stressed and in their own world, which again can be a little bit annoying as well. So there's a lot of changes and a lot of things to be aware. And this is just to highlight, what are we looking out for? Being aware of that built-in symptoms, and if we're aware of what the triggers are and what the changes are, then we're in a better position to manage those.
And I think that's really, really important, is that there are so many triggers, and that's not in the sense of to be overwhelmed, but it is to say it's not just the big obvious ones. Like I know I tend to get anxious when I can't find a car park, and during the festive season, it's really hard to do so. And that's just a lower level trigger that occurs that is on top of probably the other bigger triggers too. So I think it's really important that coming back to experiencing flare-ups of symptoms and those sort of things, the response is going to be multi-layered. It's not just about the last thing that occurred, therefore you're feeling pretty crappy. It's probably potentially going to be an accumulation or a series of activities or triggers or things that would play a role, because this time of year has lots of them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why there's a bit of a list there, not to be overwhelming. Back at the last, period and think about what could have contributed, what could have been building, leading to a potential setback.
Yeah, definitely.
And then if there is a setback, which again, completely normal and okay, in managing that, we want to, I guess, make sure we're listening to our body first and foremost and adjusting our baselines. So where we can, what's our usual routine, and can we pull that back slightly to allow space for that setback? It's okay to slow it down. It's okay to feel, a bit crappy around that setback. We don't want to ignore that and push through, because that's not going to help, and we're not listening to our body. So it's, reducing the intensity. So if we're thinking about, the social events, it's how can we reduce the intensity there? How can we pace socially to make sure we're not just ignoring our body and pushing through? Can we make the social events a little bit quieter, not around busy places, less people, the location, who's there? So we'll talk a few more around social things as we go. With the exercise, if it's not your best week, it's not the time to, again, push. It's pulling it back, keeping it cruisy, keeping it gentle, just prioritizing tasks. What do you want to say yes to? What can you actually say no to, just to balance out that energy? Make a list even. Think about what are your comforts and what are your supports so that you can go to them. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to think of them when you're trying to think of them, so having that list pre-prepared can be helpful. And your support team, so always communicating with those around you how you're feeling and what you need from them as well. And And yeah, so we don't want to just ignore that. It's mostly around relaxing the rules and listening to your body. How can we balance that load to make sure that we're not, doing more than what we're giving ourselves back?
Definitely. All I heard in that was balance, 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 balance. Like do what you need to do and don't do what your body's telling you not to do. I think we will talk, as you said, a little bit about social load, but I think this time of year, boundaries is really important, and making sure that we respect our needs and we put our needs first, because nobody else is going to, because they don't know how. And it is about us putting ourselves first and learning to help other people navigate that with us, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So probably a big discussion to have is stress management. And I feel like this has probably been, in vogue this year, talking about stress management and looking at how we deal with that. And obviously the first thing to identify is that stress is completely normal. I suppose one of the biggest things that we do want to look at is whether we feel like it is controlling us and consuming us versus whether we do have an okay handle on it. And as we know, stress can actually lead to symptoms, and that can exacerbate our symptom status or our overall condition. And when I talk to patients about stress, I am always the first to say that I am a high functioning stress head. And it means that I've learned to navigate my way through really high levels of stress. And I don't ever, I don't ever downplay the fact that I know I stress. And over the years, I've developed my tools around this. And when I talk to patients about stress, I always say that there's 3 things that you need to know. And these come into, what are your symptoms of stress? When you are experiencing stress, what symptoms begin to present? So for me, that's headaches, that's frustration, and I have this lack of appetite and an inability to fall asleep. So that's me when I'm feeling stressed. Then we have warning signs of stress, and these are the symptoms before. These are the warning signs. These are the ones that we're saying, hey, stress is developing. Maybe we want to do something here. And for me, my warning signs of stress is I start craving chocolate, which is probably not a good time of year to be craving chocolate considering it's everywhere. But I start going to bed a little bit earlier, and my problem solving ability tends to slow down. I'm an extremely logical problem solving individual. And when I'm becoming stressed, I start to notice that my processing changes. So I've learned that when I'm stressed, when I'm experiencing my symptoms of stress, it's really hard for me to get on top of, because we're already at that peak, and I feel like I'm swimming against a current. Versus where over time I've learned to take action at those warning signs. I've learned to pick up that they are the subtle shift in symptom status or how I'm feeling, and they tell me that I need to take action now. And it's kind of, figuring out our rhythm behind things. And I suppose we kind of get used to all these different types of symptoms, and we somewhat get used to pushing through, unfortunately, that we don't necessarily differentiate. A different level of symptom or a severity of symptom potentially means a different thing, and it means different opportunity as well. So when I first talk about symptoms, those are the obvious ones. The symptoms of stress are quite obvious because they hit a peak. They are quite loud. They are quite debilitating. And when we start picking at that, we begin to see that something occurred before that, and that's our warning signs. And once we're aware of those warning signs and we're aware of those symptoms, we then can look at, all right, I know what I need to do here. It's the concept of taking action when we're experiencing warning signs of stress. And that's where that question of what are your relieving factors, that's where this comes into it. So we all have things that help us relax, wind down, recharge, settle. And these are all things that we need to do when we're stressed, but before we're stressed as well. And these are obviously a big part of pacing too. But I suppose there's a different level, there's a different type of pacing for stress management. Sometimes different tools will come in. And it's really important to be aware of what you do need when you're stressed versus what you don't need when you're stressed, because it's not about applying the exact same tools that you always do, because stress is present and stress requires potentially something different of us. So I always like to start by questioning going, what helps you relieve your stress, either when you're at a peak or when you know that you're getting stressed? What's going to help you settle down? And that can be settling down your nervous system, but that can also be through, at times, distraction, if that's what we need. That's the time where we might need more support than usual, and we need to communicate that. There will be slight differences behind pacing and stress management, and we need to be aware of first how that presents within our body, and therefore, I suppose, the tools that we implement around.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that idea of looking at the warning signs, because often I'll look at changes in behavior, and I guess that can kind of show those patterns of when there's stress building. So often there'll be that change in behavior, and because it doesn't feel stressful yet, it's okay, and we keep going.
Yeah.
If we can tune into that, then yeah, we can get really on top of that stress management.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose recently I've been using the example of our YouTube video, The Traffic Lights. I've been talking to people about, let's say, emotional traffic lights, which is, the same thing, but just talking about it emotionally, of going, hang on, what's your red light status? So that's your symptoms of stress. What's your orange light status? Those are your warning signs. And what activities are going to help you get back to that green level? Because during this time of experiencing stress, and I'm probably going to say this statement at least 10 times throughout this talk, but it's not what you do, it is how you do it. And I suppose that's hopefully one of the biggest takeaways from tonight is, when we're looking at surviving the end of year and navigating our way through the festive season, it's not what you're doing, it's definitely looking at how you can do it that's more health supportive.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we always talk about stress being broken down into two components, and these are our controllables and our uncontrollables. And if anyone has seen us here at the clinic, they will have used these because they're a huge tool. They're a very big, beautifully obvious component of stress management. We have things that we can control, that we can take action around, and there are management strategies or navigation tools. And then we have things that we cannot control. And sometimes these are the big elephant in the room that we need to sit next to. And other times it's looking at navigating our way through that, or allowing space for that. But it's really important to identify what are our controllables and literally what can we do about them, versus what are our uncontrollables and how can we better support ourselves through being exposed to these uncontrollables.
Yeah, and identifying those uncontrollables doesn't mean that we are just okay with them. They can still cause a lot of stress. And I think in being aware of stress, managing stress as well, it doesn't mean that there is no stress. It's just the tools we put into place around those. Like you said, Rhea, you are a high functioning stress head. So it's not having no stress means we get through it.
Yeah, exactly. And, I suppose we need to take ownership on certain components of stress, and we also kind of need to disown certain components of stress, in the sense that if it's uncontrollable, how much space is it taking up? How much is it impacting upon your life that potentially we could alter? And that's not to say that stress doesn't exist, because it's an uncontrollable stress, but it is to say, can it impact you 1 or even 5% less than it was before, just purely how you navigate, how you personally manage your stress?
Yeah, definitely.
So we did say stress is a big topic. So we have our uncontrollables, and I suppose the really obvious ones that came to mind was things like time of year, things like weather at the moment, especially here in Melbourne, or here in Australia going into summer. Then we have others, so other people or other situations that we're not used to. Then we have an increase in demand or load. So that could be an increase in social demand and an increase in physical load, or an increase in cognitive load in terms of navigating plans and lists and social calendars, etc. Uncontrollables will be things like certain triggers. So these can be environmental or external ones, or things that we've been exposed to. And we also see that sometimes uncontrollably, we may have a change in routine, in the sense that things might be a little bit busier, and therefore our routine has shifted a little bit. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but we do need to make space for that change or for that uncontrollable, which is causing stress. And I suppose moving away from that, we have our controllables. And from I sort of use this in the idea of literally in the festive season or wrapping up the year, there's almost so many controllables. Controllables can be who you are spending your time with, the difference of spending time with one person comparatively to four, because there's a different energy demand, or who you feel safest with, in the sense that you can respect your pacing and your body's capacity and rest as you need to. So who is sort of who we spend our time with. We have our what, so what we're choosing to do, what we are exposed to. And yeah, there's different ways of doing that too, but to some extent, we are in control of the what, definitely. Same with when, you know, if we're not very good in the mornings, then have a boundary that you don't go out for breakfast, even if that's suggested. I'm going, actually, I'm really sorry, that time of, don't even apologize, actually. Just going, actually, that time of day doesn't suit me. Can we please do lunch? Sometimes it is the difference of literally changing the time of an event, or looking at setting up what your routine looks like and when you're doing things that best support having as much functionality behind the day itself. And I spoke to someone last week and we were talking about the idea that they definitely didn't respect, this was their language, not mine. They definitely didn't respect their boundaries. They essentially ran over it with a sledgehammer, and that was that. And I said, okay, how can we look at doing that a little bit differently? And we went through this, and the idea was, actually, the social load could have been pushed back a little bit later. We could have done it a little bit later, so we had that recharge point before it. Or it could have, the context behind it could have changed. We could have changed the where it was. So I suppose coming to the where, that can be the difference of going to a loud restaurant versus a quiet cafe, or sitting inside versus outside, or going somewhere rather than staying in. So where can certainly make a difference, because there's a lot of, as we discussed before, a lot of triggers that can come around with the where too. What's within our control is the why. You know, this time of year, we feel obligated to do certain things. And I think it's really important to sit back and reflect, why are we actually doing this? And does it actually matter to us personally? Or do we feel like there's an obligation behind it that actually isn't worth our very precious energy that actually goes into it? So when we look at, you know, fine tuning things and looking at our controllables, sometimes we want to look at the why do you want to do this? Why don't you want to do this? Or whatever it may be. Sometimes we can shift the why a little bit, or acknowledge and set our baselines, or set our boundaries and respect our boundaries accordingly, based on the why. And to keep talking, I told you I talk a lot. Lastly is the how. As I said, it's not what, it is how. It is all of the things. It's changing how you go about things that's more health friendly, and looking at all of these components: who, what, when, where, why, and how. How can you navigate this to be better for you, so that you don't feel like you're pushing as much, or so that you don't feel like you're exposed to something above your capacity so frequently? If we change the how, which is probably the big, all of the others, I suppose it probably encompasses all the others, we can look at the idea of how do we best navigate this so that it's as supportive for our capacity and overall our stress management too.
Yeah, I think in all those controllables, there's so much between, you know, doing something and not doing something, where it's finding the right level for you, and making it, like you said, as supportive as possible. So it's not, yes, I can do that, no, it's too much. It's making it work for you by going through all of those little topics.
Yeah, definitely. So more on stress management, just gentle reminders. And I suppose some of the biggest parts was, accept that there are things that you cannot control. Okay. That's a really big part of it. And we, as much as that's a really angry looking face, we want to be assertive, not aggressive. We want to be able to respect our boundaries and our needs, but we want to have an effective level or form of communication as we need. It's really important that we do keep a positive attitude. You've got this. You do know how to handle this. You do know how to manage this situation. Don't doubt yourself. You don't need to add the filter of doubt coming through when you've navigated things similar to this in the past. And it's just important that you trust yourself and you know what you're doing. And then I suppose from a practical standpoint, continue with your basics. Make sure that you are eating healthy and drinking water. Don't neglect these essentials. If you're a person who's currently exercising and that's helping you manage and pace your days accordingly, then continue with your exercise. And it's really important that you make sure that you have downtime and that you're mindful and that you have, parts of your day where you really switch off. And I suppose lastly, it's really important to prioritize and manage your time. And I suppose time is correct and incorrect all at the same time, in the sense that you need to prioritize and manage your energy. You don't have this big, beautiful amount of energy. Unfortunately, I wish I could give that to everyone. But we need to pace it accordingly, put it into the things that are important to you, and prioritize and manage your energy and time according to what suits you best throughout the upcoming month. Oh my goodness, there's so much on stress. You can tell that I'm just waiting to hand over to Leanne, but not yet.
Reminders.
So exact. Well, it is the festive season. I suppose there's a lot on stress. I haven't looked if there's any questions coming through, but I suppose I have covered this, I hope. But focus on you, prioritize you. It is still okay for you to do your hobbies, your interests, and your joyful tasks. Just because you have the opportunity to go do that doesn't mean that you can't do this or that you should do this because it's actually genuinely what you want to do. I know that there has been many a times in my past and in my future that I have chosen to watch a Christmas movie rather than socialize, because that's just what I wanted to do, and that's completely okay. I suppose set your time limits and your boundaries and say no in times that you want to or need to. Both of those are completely okay. Sometimes we get okay or right at saying no when we need to, but also learn your boundaries, your limits, and saying no when you want to as well. It's really important that we do prioritize our rest and sleep. So make sure that you are recharging. Make sure that you're prioritizing the important things and that you're drowning the other things out. Make sure that you're seeking support, asking for help, communicating to those around you. Practice your stress reducing techniques. Make sure that you're looking at those relieving factors and that they're part of your days and your weeks. And remember what's important to you, both this time of year, but also long term. Don't get caught up in it is December and I need to do all of these things. January does exist. January will be coming, and we can still do, I always get swept up in trying to do all these appointments by the end of the year. And it's like, no, January is only a couple of weeks away. They can be pushed back a couple of weeks if need be. So I suppose it's remembering what's important. Don't get caught up in the chaos that can be festive season. Make sure that you're prioritizing and looking after yourself.
Yeah, I guess the end of the year can feel like a bit of a deadline, can't it? But
it can.
It keeps going. Time will keep going, and then there's another month. So it is okay to...
Exactly.
I guess that's part of prioritizing as well. Like, what things could you push back to create a bit more space around this busier period? We do have 2021 as well, which hopefully will be a bit kinder.
Yes.
So again, just looking at that pacing and planning and what we can do to look ahead. And in general, December looks a little bit busy, regardless of there being a lockdown and regardless of Christmas, if we celebrate that or not. There is still a lot of changes that happen around the end of the year, even though we just said it's not really a deadline. Much changes. A lot of the routines do change. So these are just some of the ideas that I thought of around what could be changing. So with work, a lot of people may have time off. A lot of people may also work through the holiday period as well. And whether you're having time off or whether you're continuing working, that's going to change your routine. If you're continuing working, that might look different as well, because a lot of businesses, this is their busiest period. So this is the most crazy work period, or maybe it's really quiet, depending on what industry you're in, I guess. School or study, usually around this time of year, there's a pretty long break if you're doing university study. I remember this being like a 3-month break, which sounds so luxurious. Although I know things have been pushed back and moved around a bit this year as well. Or if you're a parent, that's going to change who's home at who's home during the day, suddenly, you know, there's all the kids home all day, and now we're organising their meals, their outings, keeping them entertained. They want to go catch up with people. So that's going to mean we don't have that quiet time during the day, and we're thinking about who's around, what are they doing. Again, there's that social change, so we'll touch on that in a bit more detail. With more people being home, we don't have as much alone time, which is actually really, really valuable and important. When it's gone, you realise that alone time's really, vital. And I guess one thing we can do is, once we've noticed that change, is actually try and plan that in, so we still do have a bit of space to ourselves. So yeah, I guess sometimes around this time of year, we get the hang of pacing and we have this really good routine, and it works. And then there's these big changes in what we have on and what we do, that all of a sudden it's kind of the usual routine's gone, and it can be a little bit easier to fall into a bit of a boom and bust pattern because we're just used to it being so simple. So yeah, pacing is going to look different, and that's where we want to think a little bit about how can we still keep that balance? How can we still make sure you're recharging enough for what you're doing? Forward planning is going to be really helpful with the change in everything and the increased load and the busyness around different types of events. And again, boundaries, which you'll hear a lot, but we want to think about what our boundaries are and then stick to them as well. So once you know what they are, they stay there.
Yeah. Yes. There's a lot that we can say on boundaries, but I think it speaks for itself.
Yeah, when it's all sprinkled in here. So yeah, this is just some ideas about how we can manage this. So yes, there's lots of changes. The ones we've just talked about, they're not all going to be relevant, but some of them will be for different people. So yeah, this is a really, really good time to think about what are your baselines, how do we pace? Forward planning is going to be great because that way we can actually see ahead. A lot of things do just pop up or accumulate, and we don't realise how busy our weeks become in the lead up to Christmas. So yeah, making sure that we're planning ahead, looking at what we've got on, getting back at your activity diary can be really helpful around this time of year, or a simple form of a paper diary, just a weekly planner. Sometimes that can be good to have the family's schedule on, or your housemate's schedule on, just so that you know who's going to be where, when, and when is those pockets of quiet time going to be. Just making sure we know what's coming up and it's nice and balanced. In your planning ahead, we want to make sure that you are planning in some downtime and some self-care, because that's important. That's what's going to help, balance that out and keep us going. So it's not always just go, one event to the next. That needs to be in our plan. And then again, your boundaries and getting used to saying no. It can be really, really challenging. But once we start practicing, it does get a little bit easier, and it is completely okay to say no to things. We're not obligated to always say yes and always be that person that's there.
Definitely. And I suppose recently I've had this conversation with a few people, and my personal way of saying no is, I'm sorry, I don't have that within my space at the moment, or I'm sorry. Don't say sorry. Don't say sorry. You don't need to say sorry for enforcing your boundaries. But I don't have space for that, or I don't have capacity for that right now. So it's not saying that it's not important, and it's not saying that you don't want to. It's just saying that, it's a capacity thing, or it's a space thing, and right now it doesn't fit.
Yeah. It's probably a good one for people to share different ways to say no.
Yes.
It's so challenging. I've always struggled with saying no.
Mm-hmm.
So if anyone has good tips there or good phrases they use, that would be very useful for everyone.
Yes, definitely. Okay.
So this one's more around managing that increase in social load, because again, that's such a big part of this time of the year. So thinking about how is social activity tiring? So what sort of fatigue do we experience? Is it more the conversation and the concentration that, causes the fatigue? Is it more the environment, being out with people, being busy? Or is it, what you're doing, I guess? So different ways that it's fatiguing is going to give us more ideas about different ways we can manage that, what to focus on.
Yeah, definitely. And I think these are really important questions to regularly check in on.
Yeah, so with different ways to recharge, there are different types of rest, and this changes depending on what you're doing. So if you're in our Facebook group, a while ago, we started to establish a recharge encyclopedia, which, we have a final copy now, which is great, and I use it a lot, in talking about, what are some different ways to recharge depending on how we're feeling and what type of fatigue it is. And often after busy social activity, it is around having a bit of quiet and not engaging in conversation, or not, listening to others, having that space to yourself. If it's more environmentally, having, nice peace and quiet, being outdoors, having your comforts, your supports, or your sims. And that, I guess, helps us know what battery do we need to charge, basically, which area.
Yeah, definitely. I think I really like the what battery do we need to charge. Like it is the concept of being conscious if we're running low on a flat battery, or whether we just need to be conscious that we don't have enough for what we're doing. But I really like using the analogy of energy is like unfortunately a crappy phone battery, but it is about the concept of really prioritizing recharging.
Yeah. And then again, boundaries. So that's the idea of setting.
There's a theme here.
I really like that idea of your circle of controllables there, with thinking about your boundaries. So the first thing, what is important, what you want to say yes to. And then once it is important to you and you do want to increase that social activity, or you do have a lot on, going through that, what can you modify, what can you change to make it more supportive, or mean that you get the most out of it, because this time of year should be fun as well. You want to actually enjoy all these things and all these social events. It shouldn't be stressful or something that we, not look forward to. I don't know what that is. You want to make sure you can do this in the best way possible and actually enjoy everything that you're engaging in.
And I think what's important around boundaries is we're looking at, I suppose we've been saying what's important to you, what's not important to you, but there's also things in between that there's sort of a hierarchy of importance. There are certain things that are more important than the others, and that doesn't downplay the importance of that thing that might be slightly below. Because I think around the end of the year, there's do I see this person? Do I do that? Do I do this for my child? Do I do this for me? And I think it can be really difficult navigating that. And I suppose when we look at the idea of what's important, it's not to downplay the importance of certain things, but is to look at what is most important and setting up, I suppose, around that. It's not to downplay that certain thing. It doesn't mean things aren't important, but it's to say that there will be things that are more important, and that's okay.
Yeah, so prioritizing, which is another theme that a lot in this.
I love that we're consistent. It's great.
I think as well, I don't know if anyone else has noticed this, but that increase in social load is going to feel a lot different in this year, post 8 months or so of isolation. I don't know if I'm exaggerating with the 8 months. I'm not even sure anymore.
I have no idea.
But after that long period of, a lot of time at home, a lot of quiet time, the increase in social load is probably feeling a little bit more taxing than usual. And it's just lots of people in one room is feeling a bit overwhelming. So I guess this is probably even more than usual. This is, we're feeling the load.
Yeah, definitely. And being able to identify those major or common triggers that have popped up just literally because what we haven't been exposed to.
Yeah, sometimes it can be a little bit easier to actually notice what is triggering after having that big break and noticing where our baselines are coming out of that lockdown period.
Definitely. I had someone the other day reporting more back pain, and they realized that it's because they've actually been driving again. They actually left the house and got in the car and realized that their commute to and from uni all the time was actually having a huge impact on their back pain. So little things like that we've potentially normalized in the past because we've just, powered on and soldiered on and gone on with it, that it can be playing more of a role than we've considered.
Yeah, driving's always awful. That isn't
It is. Very much so. All right.
So then this again, some of the similar themes, but hopefully some new ones as well, and just different ways to think about them.
Yeah.
Around increasing our social activity. Again, huge change at the moment, really busy time of the year. So that same idea of forward planning, knowing what's on, knowing what's coming up. So we're looking at the total volume, not just going day by day. Again, boundaries and prioritizing. So thinking about what do we most want to engage in and focusing on that first, focusing on the parts we can control. It is okay to say no to things, but also think about all those ways you could modify things and events to make them easier. And then your support's going to be really important to know what your supports are, know what your strategies are, and communicate. Let people know how you're feeling and what you need from them, how they can help you. And I always talk about planning your outs. It's, I guess, having a few things in mind and ready to go when we're at social events. Sometimes we realize we're starting to feel a bit foggy or a bit tired and going, okay, I want to leave soon. And it can be quite hard to think of that in the middle of a conversation and around other people. So actually thinking of a few little excuses that, aren't technically lies. I just need a little break from getting some fresh air, going to the bathroom, little kind of exits from conversations that we don't have to think about on the spot can help us, get a break and pace during those social events. So we have a bit of downtime as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think sometimes it can be the difference of a use of a code word in a situation that you use your code word with the loved one, and that's them, you work together to navigate your way out of whatever it was that you were doing, or that's where you've hit your red light or your orange light or something like that. That, as Leanne said, communication and planning can be really, really helpful in these sort of situations.
Yeah, really important. And, we don't have to use all these strategies and do all this on our own. It's, going to be really helpful to use the people around you for support and, let them know what you need.
Definitely. And I think another really important one is, as much as we've been saying importance and say no or reschedule or whatever it may be, it's also important to remind you to say yes. So say yes to what's important. Say yes to something that's really important to you that you do want to do. As we said, flare-ups and setbacks may be a normal component of this, but sometimes it's really worth it too. So sometimes I think it is about as much as we've been saying, learn your boundaries and learn to say no and prioritize and blah, blah, blah. It's also okay to say yes to what's important.
Yeah, if it's worth it, absolutely. And then again, you're planning what you can around that to make sure you can be a part of those things, and if you need a bit of extra recovery time afterwards, that's okay too, if it's worth it.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like there's a lot around this time of years. There's a lot to say yes to, which is okay too.
Say yes to people helping you as well.
Oh, that's a good one.
To people, but so hard to say yes to help as well when people are offering help, which is so silly. So yeah, definitely accepting people's help and support when it's on offer is important.
That literally, Leanne has just come in with that whole mic drop. She's just blown everything away of just saying, say yes to help. I think that's one I've not actually thought of, and that's huge, absolutely huge. That's completely life-changing this time of year.
To help.
No, I love it. Okay. Pacing the hotter weather. I feel like we've spoken a lot about boundaries and a lot about saying no and saying yes, and oh my goodness. So moving on to something slightly different. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here because you see this beautiful link. There has been a recent webinar specifically on pacing the hotter weather and discussing it. So we did want to add it to today's chat because it is a big component of this time of year. But if you do want to learn more, feel free to click this link. It is the, I don't know if you can click the link, but I'll share it. It is within the AHC connection. It was a video that myself and Nathan did last week or the week before called Pacing the Hotter Weather. So I suppose the main points that I'm going to make now is consider how and when the weather impacts your symptoms. So I've been talking to patients recently and I totally forgot that I had orthostatic intolerance during COVID and winter. I was really well managed. That these slightly hotter days coming in, I started to go, oh, okay, I remember these symptoms. Not necessarily my old friend, but I do know how to handle them. So just consider where you're at with this and keep that in mind. And also be aware of what your normal responses are, because when we come to this time of year, we're a little bit out of practice too. So we need to be aware of what symptoms to be aware of, but we also need to be aware of our appropriate strategies. So I've recently got the Aquaforce back out. I've got my big drink bottle. I've been pacing and putting my feet up more. I've been making sure to not sit in direct sunlight if I'm working with a patient. Little things like that. Most of you have probably seen I've gone through half my water already. So being able to be prepared, I suppose. We also need to make space for the symptoms. If it's really high 30-degree days, then those are probably days where we obviously definitely wouldn't exercise outside, but we might not have a whole lot of space for other things. So we need to make space for those symptoms and adapt our days accordingly as needed. And I suppose we need to focus on our strategies and our relieving factors. So hydration, salt, potentially compression, whether that be clothes or water, looking at what helps us really manage the symptom onset. And sometimes it is about adapting our expectation for the day. That could be like, I really planned on vacuuming the house today, but oh my goodness, it's hot. I can't do this. So being able to go, maybe today's not a good day to do that. And that's completely okay. And I suppose that kind of falls into create a list of do's and don'ts. It is about going, okay, well, I do need to do this. I do need to prioritize my water, or I do need to really focus on making sure that I'm eating regularly in smaller meals instead, or I really need to focus on elevating my feet post-meal. So creating a list of strategies that are definitely your do's and making sure that you're aware of your don'ts, the things that you shouldn't necessarily do at the moment, or things just more so to help you keep your symptoms in mind. But for those of you who haven't seen that webinar, I click on it or feel free to comment and I will send you the link. As I said, I'm not technologically savvy, so I'm not going to do anything right now. So pacing the hotter weather, keeping cool, stay hydrated. I think that's quite obvious, but sometimes we need that reminder to go, okay, I'll get that drink bottle back out. Pace your postures and your rest. During the hotter weather, we do need to elevate our feet more. We do need to be horizontal more. We need to make sure that we have really restorative rest that's actually effective. We do need to eat smaller and more regular meals instead. We need to avoid exposure to prolonged heat. So it's the difference of sitting inside versus outside, the difference of sitting in the shade instead of the sun, the difference of going for a walk really early on in the day or later in the day instead of peak heat. And just went into that. Adapt your day, exercise earlier or alter an event if need be. If it was planned to be outside, it's too hot, make those considerations and potentially set up changes. Looking at the idea of controlling your body temperature, we can do this through baths, showers, swimming. This can help cool you down so you're not feeling like you're overheating. And things like swimming or baths, the water is a natural compression, so it'll help regulate that blood flow too. Again, a really straightforward one, but dress appropriately. Make sure that you're not completely overheating. That will play a large role. And be aware of your blood flow. So be aware of, how gravity is working in the situation. Are we seeing pooling in the lower limbs? Are we seeing that our hands or feet are getting swollen? Are we seeing that they're getting pinky or purple? And be aware of the things that are vasodilators as well, so that open up our blood vessels. And this time of year that we see a little bit more of is alcohol, and alcohol is a vasodilator. So we need to be aware that combining alcohol and hotter weather means that it's a really literal uphill battle for our blood flow to regulate itself. So we need to be as supportive as we can, or as conscious as we can, to better look after ourselves so that we're as minimally symptomatic as possible.
Cool. Some good reminders, because with everything else going on, it's those little things like something as simple as the weather that can cause, you know, or contribute to a setback or be a trigger to symptoms. And it's something that can just get kind of forgotten about with all the other busyness and everything else going on. So definitely something to keep in mind. Mm-hmm. And now we can talk a bit more about Christmas. So I guess these ones are just some kind of quick little tips and tricks around managing the festive season. And again, some of the same themes will come through that are still super relevant and important to remember. So again, your planning and your pacing, and lists are going to be really important. So keeping lists for things like when you're going shopping, so that we're not, you know, forgetting people, not forgetting people, that's what I was going to say, or getting a bit confused about what we've done, what we haven't done. Keeping a list of ideas and options for your shopping as well, your gifts shopping, so that it's you're not thinking of everything when you're out there. I'm a big one of I'll just see it and know, and it never works. So having that plan ahead can be really helpful. Planning ahead, when are your events? How are we going to pace it around them? Plan your supports, plan what things you can, those simple things like keeping yourself well hydrated, dressing appropriately, making sure you're eating enough. They're things that you can plan in advance that are going to help support your body as well. So again, it's that, you know, it's not what you do, it's how you do it, which all comes back to your planning. Relaxation, again, it's just a good reminder that this is a priority. You know, we do need to recharge. We can't be running on empty through the whole month of December. So what are you doing for your self-care? How are you incorporating that into your schedule? Maybe it's a little bit different this time of year with people being home, or changes in routine that we've talked about previously. But making sure we do have that space and that downtime. We're not getting overwhelmed. Maybe the relaxation is some more grounding or some more breathing techniques. I know that when I'm feeling overwhelmed or I'm feeling stressed, sometimes the usual things that I'll do don't quite have the same effect or don't work. So having some other options can be helpful to go to, or just reflecting on, is this working at the moment? Do we need to change it? Your priorities, so again, that word, foundation, so the things that are really important, that are our structure. So your foundations are your diet, your hydration, putting in those rest periods, managing your stress, using all those things we've talked about, your sleep, you know, something that we just kind of take for granted. We need to make sure we're prioritizing getting enough sleep to keep us going. And I think managing expectations, or actually just being aware of what our expectations are. So often we want everything to go so perfectly this time of year, but does it need to be perfect? That same thing, we want it to be fun and enjoyable. And if we're getting too caught up in making it perfect and that creates stress, then are we even enjoying the festive season? So managing those expectations is important as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. So balance will come into our planning a little bit as well. So I always think of balance as making sure we have a balance of what gives and what takes energy. If too many things are taking energy, we're not giving ourselves enough back, then we don't have that balance. Also that balance of thinking about, you know, including our wants and our hobbies and things that we just find enjoyable. Like Rhea mentioned, some things we just want to say yes to. That's an important part of balance. can't be all work, no play, because that's not fun. Good one to think about is leverage as well. So how can we make things easier? So it's kind of like energy efficiency in a way. So where can we cut corners a little bit to save energy? So around Christmas, this can be things like doing your shopping online, which is, you know, easy. We're avoiding those busy, awful shopping centres. A lot of online short stores are really set up to be really easy, especially after everything being locked down. They have to have all those facilities working. Thinking about gifts and, you know, what can be homemade as well. If you're a bit creative and if that's even part of your downtime, then you're getting that task done, you're getting the gifts done, but it's also your downtime and something you enjoy. If you've got that talent, that's great. I wish I did.
Me too.
Leverage can also be thinking about all the tasks you've got and what can you maybe delegate. Again, asking for help or accepting help is part of leverage. Stress management, we've again.
Remember, but I feel like we covered that.
Go back. It's all okay. Just reflect on what's your stress management, what's the most important thing for you.
Love it.
And then just some of those final reminders of those things that are easily forgotten. Make sure you do keep hydrated and keep cool. Think about the impact the weather might have. Get a fun drink bottle to make it really easy. With your social events, we've talked about the tips there. So keep in mind your boundaries, your supports, using code words, all those things. Boundaries is there again. And that final reminder, it's okay to take a day off. It's probably important. It's encouraged. A day off can be productive to get all the things done that need to get done. So absolutely give yourself a day off.
100%. Resting is productive. I think that's the one thing that I try and, drill into every single person that I've ever spoken to ever, is that resting is actually productive. It's important and it's good for us.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why it's one of those priorities.
Yes, exactly. So I suppose we're running perfectly on time, I believe, kind of. Yeah. So if anyone has questions, do feel free to comment below, ask them. I'm not too sure. So I suppose, a question. I actually don't know how to work this, I'm sorry. So we've had a question, what are some ways to effectively pace and plan when visiting relatives and staying away from home for a few nights over Christmas? I think that's a really good one, and something really important to cover is that I suppose our pacing strategies change, but also why do they have to change so much? They might only need to change a little bit.
Yeah, it definitely adds a challenge. Not having the comfort of your own space. I think I read that right. You're staying away with others. Mm-hmm. Not having the comfort of your own space, I guess modifying to other people's routines, and there's going to be more people around, but still thinking about what's important to you. How do you pace currently, and how can you take those patterns and those strategies with you? Part of that will be, what do you need to take when you're staying somewhere else? Is it something like having your own pillow that's going to be really important for a good night's sleep? How are you communicating with your relatives and your loved ones, and letting them know what maybe you need? A little bit more downtime, when you've got your door closed, that's your time and space, and you don't want to be interrupted. I forgot what I was going to say next.
No, I think that's a really, really important component, is prepare for the downtime. So whether this be have a conversation about the concepts that you may need a bedroom, and you may need that space to be quiet at that time. So people might go for a walk at that time, so you've got that space to yourself. Or people might watch a movie at that time, again, so that you've got space or downtime or quiet time. So I suppose most of our pacing strategies shouldn't change too much. But I think it's also forward planning and setting up our own personal expectations in regard to how we can respect them. So looking at how we're going to make them work in the situation itself, and B, is it about having conversation with those that you're there with of saying, hey, I'm going to do this, hope you don't mind, or hey, can you support me in this way, or can you help out, whatever it may be. I think that concept of, as Leanne was talking about, planning and preparing, I think the more that we look at where our triggers may be or where our difficulty may be, I think that will play a very large role in what our management would be alongside that.
Yeah. If you're staying somewhere else as well, part of what you're taking with you, think about what normally supports your rest? What do you normally do in your downtime? Is that something that you can take with you, so that you've still got those same things that you can engage in that do help you recharge and switch off? And yeah, just communication again. People are generally really understanding, and that if people are aware of what you're doing and why, that can kind of take that stress or maybe a feeling of guilt off you, and let you really engage in whatever your body needs.
Correct. And I think that's a really important point, is people don't know how to respect our boundaries if they don't know where they are, or if they haven't been communicated clearly. So I think one component of that is obviously making sure that there is communication, but you are the only person who knows the circumstances, the fluctuation within your symptoms, the severity, or, the why pacing or that rest break is so crucial, so important. And unless we communicate that effect accordingly and set that up, people aren't going to know. And because we generally present pretty okay, like, the whole invisible illness thing, you look fine, they're going to treat you as if you have the same capacity as usual, or whatever it may be. That it's really important that they will not know how to respect anything unless we have a gentle conversation around it too.
Yeah, so I think is like going through what we've talked through, breaking down the triggers, actually breaking down what are your supports. It's how can you use those with the change in situation or the change in environment. The best it can be. It is a little bit more challenging, definitely.
Definitely. So on that, Leanne, you cut out a little bit. I'm not sure if that was me or you. I have no idea. But I feel like that's our connection pacing and telling us that we've been speaking enough, that we've probably said boundaries and priorities and pacing 1,000 times. But hopefully it was productive. So I don't believe that we have any questions. And those of you watching later on, you're welcome to comment questions below. We're more than happy to get back to you or do a series of videos that might come in handy during this time. But for now, we hope you've taken a lot away from all of the things that we said multiple times.
A lot of repetition.
I feel like we need that this time of year though.
Yeah.
Yes. And we have got people saying it was helpful, so that's good. But for now, it's getting a bit early into the evening, a bit late into the evening. If you can hear my dog currently, he's demanding to go for his nighttime walk. So we will let everyone go wind down for the evening. If you have any questions, please reach out. This recording will be uploaded to the AHC Connection as well.
Awesome. Thank you for all joining us.
Thank you, Leanne, for doing this with me and helping me set everything up.
Didn't really help. You did it all yourself.
So I've lost my mouse, so I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to end our webinar. And thank you to everyone who came.
Bye.
Bye.